In the next 10 episodes, we'll uncover a chilling truth about what happens to your brain without social contact, a journey through isolation's silent destruction, real stories, and shocking science. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn could be happening to you or someone you love right now. Episode 1. The man who disappeared inside his own mind. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about him. Middle-aged, quiet, no history of violence. The kind of man who fades into the background of office meetings and apartment hallways. But behind the sterile walls of his solitary confinement cell, something extraordinary and terrifying was unfolding. When he first arrived, he joked with the guards. "I'm fine," he said, shrugging off the silence like it was a vacation from noise. A week in, he was still pacing confidently. A month later, the guards noticed he no longer made eye contact. Inside that cell, time bent in strange ways. Days bled into nights until both lost meaning. Hours stretched like elastic, snapping back with cruel force whenever he thought he heard footsteps or voices that weren't there. At first, the talking was harmless, to himself, to memories, to long-forgotten people from his childhood, but then the conversations changed. His tone shifted, sometimes laughing, sometimes whispering urgently, as though responding to someone just outside the camera's view. "They're here now," he muttered one night, staring at the corner of his cell. "They finally found me." Psychologists reviewed his file. No prior diagnosis, no known trauma. They wrote it off as adjustment stress. Until he started referring to them by name. Names no one had mentioned, names of people from his past. Some of whom were already dead. The security footage showed him sitting cross-legged, head tilted, nodding intently, as though he was taking instruction. His hands moved as if tracing shapes in the air, following unseen directions. When a prison psychiatrist asked who he was speaking to, he gave a simple, chilling answer: "Someone you can't see." Not yet. Behind closed doors, his unraveling accelerated. His sleep fragmented. His appetite vanished. His mind, deprived of contact, began to fill the void with shadows. Cliffhanger. One night, a guard paused outside his door. From inside came muffled conversation. The man's voice, and another, a second voice, low and rasping. But when the door swung open, the man sat alone, smiling into the empty air. Fade out. Episode 2. The science we chose to ignore. For decades, the warnings were there, buried in psychology journals, ignored in prison reports, dismissed by policymakers too eager to label solitary confinement as necessary or harmless. But Dr. Terry Kupers wasn't so easily convinced. Kupers had spent years peeling back the layers of the human mind, studying the devastating effects of isolation on the brain. His findings were clear, chilling, and grotesquely predictable. The brain without human contact doesn't just suffer, it decays. In his lectures, Kupers showed scans of inmates who had endured long stretches in solitary. The images revealed atrophied neural pathways, diminished gray matter, and hyperactive fear centers. The prefrontal cortex, the very part responsible for decision-making, empathy, and rational thought, began to shrink, like a muscle wasting away from disuse. Meanwhile, the amygdala, the brain's alarm bell, grew louder and more erratic, fear without cause, anxiety without relief, rage without outlet. But here's the detail few wanted to acknowledge: these weren't isolated phenomena confined to prison walls. Kupers began noticing disturbing parallels between solitary prisoners and individuals outside, in suburban homes, in modern offices, behind glowing screens. People who lived surrounded by others, yet reported the same symptoms: forgetfulness, emotional numbness, paranoia, hallucinations of connection. It wasn't about being physically locked away. It was about being cut off. When Kupers presented his latest research at a conference, a neuroscientist approached him afterward. Pale, trembling, holding a brain scan like a confession. "It's happening faster than we thought," she said, her voice tight with disbelief. "These aren't scans from prisoners. They're from ordinary people, isolated, lonely, working from home, addicted to screens. Socially connected, but neurologically severed." She placed the scan on the desk between them. Kupers leaned in, his breath caught in his throat. The brain showed clear signs of structural transformation. "This isn't damage," the scientist whispered. "This is evolution, in the wrong direction. Cliffhanger. Kupers sat back, the weight of it sinking in. If this was true, then isolation wasn't just harming minds, it was changing them. Fade out. Episode 3. Hallucinations aren't the worst part. At first, they called them hallucinations. Doctors scribbled words like delusional, disassociated, psychotic. Easy labels for things they couldn't explain. But to the people trapped in isolation, the voices felt real, the footsteps in the night sounded real. The shadowy figures standing in the corners of their tiny rooms seemed as solid as the walls that kept them inside. One man reported hearing a knock at his cell door every night at precisely 3:07 a.m. Another claimed to see a woman sitting on the floor, rocking slowly, her face hidden beneath a curtain of black hair. When he tried to speak to her, she would raise her head. But there was never a face beneath the hair. Only teeth. Psychiatrists explain these visions as the brain's desperate attempt to simulate interaction. Without real human contact, the mind invents it. Not because it wants to, but because it must. The brain is a social organ. Deny it connection, and it will hallucinate connection to survive. But here's where the horror sharpens, sometimes. The hallucinations don't stop after isolation ends. One man was released after 6 months alone. Within hours of walking free, he reported hearing whispers in his apartment. He could feel someone standing behind him, breathing at the back of his neck. At night, the voices grew louder, accusing him, mocking him, comforting him. His family thought it was trauma. His doctors thought it was paranoia, he thought. Maybe he hadn't been alone in that cell after all. Maybe something had followed him out. In interviews, survivors often say the same haunting words: "It wasn't the loneliness that broke me. It wasn't the fear, it was the moment I realized I wasn't alone in there anymore." Cliffhanger. One former inmate, trembling, finally admitted, "The voices they don't live in the cell. They live in me now." Fade out. Episode 4. Loneliness is the new pandemic. It wasn't just prisoners locked away in cells anymore. The walls of isolation had grown invisible, stretching far beyond concrete and steel, seeping into the fabric of everyday life. In bustling cities, behind glowing screens, millions existed in silent prisons of their own making. People scrolling endlessly through social media feeds, counting likes while counting down moments of real connection. Algorithms fed distractions but starved them of intimacy. Notifications buzzed like lifelines, hollow, synthetic, draining. Scientists called it a growing epidemic, loneliness, a silent killer creeping into homes, offices, and schools. Its victims weren't shackled or confined, but their brains showed the same signs of decay found in solitary prisoners. Memory loss, cognitive decline, depression, early mortality. Public health officials issued warnings. The World Health Organization declared loneliness a serious health risk, on par with smoking, obesity, and inactivity. Yet, society seemed trapped in denial. We embraced digital connections that left us lonelier than before. Communities frayed, families drifted apart. The noise of virtual chatter drowned out the quiet ache of human absence. But the most disturbing revelation was still to come. A whistleblower from inside a major tech company came forward in secret. She revealed confidential research proving that social media platforms knew the dangers all along. Their algorithms were designed to maximize user engagement, not mental health. They trapped users in feedback loops, encouraging isolation masked as connection. She whispered in a hushed voice, her eyes darting nervously, "They don't just sell your attention. They sell your loneliness." Suddenly, the epidemic wasn't a natural tragedy. It was a manufactured crisis, a global experiment with human minds as the test subjects. Cliffhanger. As she vanished from public view, she left one chilling message: the loneliest people aren't those with no friends. They're those trapped in a crowd of strangers. Fade out. Episode 5. The brain begins to feed on itself. Isolation doesn't just silence the mind, it turns inward, unleashing a slow, devastating feast. Inside the brains of those trapped in endless loneliness, neurons wither and die. Pathways once vibrant with thought and memory crumble like ancient ruins. Doctors call it neural atrophy, but the victims feel it as a creeping void, a gnawing emptiness that swallows their sense of self. Magnetic resonance images revealed something horrifying. The brains of prisoners who'd endured months, even years, in solitary looked eerily similar to those suffering from dementia, but the true shock was yet to come. When scientists scanned the brains of isolated teenagers locked away by social anxiety, depression, or pandemic lockdowns, they found the same patterns. Gray matter loss, memory impairment, heightened paranoia. The young minds weren't just fragile. They were unraveling prematurely. One neuroscientist described it as, the brain is cannibalizing itself, feeding on its own connections because there's nothing left to sustain it. Paranoia takes root in the darkness. Memories twist into nightmares. Thought spirals collapse into confusion. Sleep becomes a battleground, dreams turning to terror, and waking hours haunted by shadows of doubt and fear. Patients report losing time, forgetting names, faces, even their own reflection. The mind fractures under the weight of isolation's invisible poison. And the scariest part, this wasn't limited to prison cells or clinical cases anymore. It was happening quietly, everywhere. Cliffhanger. One teen's MRI scan flickered on the screen during a presentation. The room fell silent. The image was unmistakable, signs of advanced neural decay. But the most shocking fact was whispered afterward. That scan isn't from an old prisoner. It's from a teenager, one who'd never been locked up. Fade out. Episode 6, When Touch is a Matter of Life and Death. Imagine a world where the gentlest touch is a forgotten memory, where skin no longer feels the warmth of another human being. For many locked in isolation, touch becomes as scarce as sunlight, and its absence triggers a silent decay far worse than loneliness. Scientists have long known, touch is essential to survival. It regulates hormones, strengthens the immune system, and anchors us to reality. Without it, the body begins to falter, immune defenses weaken, stress hormones flood unchecked, and aging accelerates like a runaway train. Infants abandoned in orphanages, deprived of nurturing contact, show stunted growth and cognitive delays, their bodies betraying the deep ache of neglect. But what if this wasn't just a tragedy of infancy? Across the world today, adults face a similar silent epidemic. Alone in apartments, behind locked doors, isolated by choice or circumstance, they endure a breakdown almost indistinguishable from the orphanage syndrome. In one chilling social experiment, volunteers agreed to live without physical contact for weeks. At first, they laughed it off, a quirky challenge. But as days dragged on, their bodies rebelled. Skin became hypersensitive, sleep grew elusive, and a creeping numbness spread through their limbs. Then, one participant vanished without a trace. His last message, sent in a trembling text, read, "I no longer feel human." Medical experts remain baffled, but Kupers insists the explanation is clear. The absence of touch rewires the brain's wiring for connection, replacing warmth with cold calculation, empathy with emptiness. In isolation, human beings don't just suffer psychological wounds. They endure a biological crisis, a bodily betrayal that cuts to the core of life itself. Cliffhanger. As the experiment's overseers scramble to find the missing participant, the silence echoes a terrible question. How long can a person live, truly live, without being touched? Fade out. Episode 7. The Lie of I'm Fine. From the outside, they often seem to be coping, even thriving. They smile when visitors come. They answer questions with practiced calm. They say the words everyone wants to hear, I'm fine. But behind that mask lies a fragile truth, a simmering storm of loneliness, fear, and despair. Isolation doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It seeps slowly, eroding the mind's defenses until the smallest crack becomes a gaping chasm. High-functioning individuals, once pillars of strength, suddenly spiral into darkness. A respected teacher shatters during a parent-teacher conference, screaming at empty chairs. A promising young artist vanishes, found days later wandering a distant park, unable to recall her own name. Many recount moments when the pain became unbearable. When the loneliness wasn't just a feeling, but a deafening roar. One survivor's confession chills the spine. I tried to end it because the loneliness felt louder than my heartbeat. Therapists call this moment the breaking point, when denial collapses and reality floods in, overwhelming and merciless. But it's also when help is hardest to reach. Because by then, the mind is tangled in knots of paranoia and hopelessness. Even loved ones are pushed away, seen as threats or hallucinations. The most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves, and the cruelest is the insistence that everything is okay. Cliffhanger. As the episode closes, a phone rings unanswered. A message plays on voicemail. If you're hearing this, I'm not fine, and I need you to know. Fade out. Episode 8. Prison without bars. Solitary confinement isn't just a punishment reserved for prison cells. It's a metaphor, a mirror reflecting a society slowly building invisible walls around us all. Dr. Terry Kupers sees it clearly. Loneliness, ignored mental health, toxic workplaces, and fractured communities are modern chains locking people in cages without bars. Cities grow taller, but connections grow thinner. Neighbors pass without a glance. Offices buzz with hollow chatter, while workers retreat behind screens and noise-canceling headphones. Social gatherings shrink into curated, superficial exchanges. This new isolation breeds a strange paradox, surrounded by millions, yet utterly alone. Kupers points to studies revealing alarming increases in workplace burnout, social anxiety, and depression, conditions once rare, now epidemic. Even worse, many don't realize they're imprisoned. They accept their isolation as normal, a byproduct of progress, technology, or just how things are. A psychologist working with Kupers sums it up bluntly: we're designing cities that function like prisons. He pauses, voice heavy with meaning. No bars, no locks. But every bit as deadly. Cliffhanger. As the psychologist's words echo, a city skyline flickers with endless windows. Behind one, a figure stares blankly at a phone screen, trapped in silence. In the distance, the faint hum of a prison door slamming shut. Fade out. Episode 9. The rewired mind cannot go back. For some, the damage runs too deep. The mind that once craved connection now recoils from it, a fortress built of fear and fractured trust. Stories pour in from those who have emerged from isolation, only to find themselves trapped in a new prison, one of their own making. Relationships crumble under the weight of silence and suspicion. Family members become strangers, old friends' faces blur into indistinct shapes. One woman describes it as living behind a thick glass wall, able to see the world, but unable to touch it. Doctors call it neuroplastic scarring, permanent rewiring of the brain's social circuits. Even short bursts of extreme loneliness can leave lasting psychological shifts, heightened anxiety, emotional numbness, a distorted sense of reality. The tragedy is clear. The brain that adapts to survive isolation often loses its way back to belonging. Kupers recounts stories of individuals who, after months or years alone, walk into crowds yet feel utterly invisible, as if their very essence has been erased. Cliffhanger. New research now suggests that these changes aren't just mental, they're molecular, embedded deep in the brain's architecture. And once triggered, they may never fully reverse. Fade out. Episode 10. The final warning. It's already happening to you. Everything comes full circle. The man from the first episode, the one who vanished inside his own mind, was never truly locked behind prison walls. His solitary confinement wasn't imposed by guards or concrete cells, it was self-imposed. He lived alone, in a quiet suburb, surrounded by strangers who never knocked on his door. Kupers' chilling conclusion sinks in: isolation doesn't need bars anymore. Technology, disconnection, the erosion of genuine human contact, these are the new prisons, silent and invisible. We scroll endlessly, share shallow connections, and settle for digital ghosts. The human brain, starving for real interaction, slowly devours itself. We live in a world wired for connection, but designed for isolation. The final twist: the man wasn't unique. He was the future of all of us if we don't act. Kupers warns, the danger isn't distant or fictional, it's here, now, quietly unraveling millions of minds. Closing message: the scariest part, you won't realize it's happening until it already has. Reconnect, before it's too late. Fade to black.